What is seller financing? What's up, everybody? It's Jeff Trevarthen, Jeff the Mortgage Pro. Thanks so much for watching the video today. We're talking about seller financing. Now, just so you know, this isn't something that's ever going to benefit me as a loan officer. I'm not going to be doing any seller financing loans unless it's my own property. But this is something that's in it for informational purposes only, and it's for you as a buyer out there, that there are opportunities right now in today's market to be able to get and obtain what's called seller financing. And you probably have no idea what any of this stuff is. So let's kind of go through it. So seller financing is very simple in its nature. And what's happening is that instead of a bank doing a mortgage on a property, the seller is going to do what's called a carryback, and they're going to have a mortgage note drawn up on their property that they're selling to you. And it's basically a mortgage that the seller carries instead of a bank. So if you can imagine, like, is it easier to qualify with a seller, or do you think it's easier to qualify for a bank loan? And my guess, especially right now and how tight credit is it's way easier to negotiate with a seller to be able to get a loan. So let's do this with an example here. I think it's probably the easiest way to kind of explain it. Let's say you have a guy and his name is Seller John, and he owns a property for $1 million free and clear. He wants to sell a property and wants to take some of the gain right now, but he wants to defer some of the profit that he's going to make on this property for a later amount of time. So at the end of the day, that's going to be a pretty good situation for Seller John. He has a property that's worth $1 million. He owns it free and clear. He doesn't have a mortgage payment on it. And this guy, buyer Bob, comes along and he's interested in Seller John's property. So he's got $200,000 down for the down payment. He's got some loan left over for reserves. He's got good credit, etc. He's actually qualified for a bank loan, but the prevailing market interest rates, let's say, are 7.5% on that bank loan. So an $800,000 loan with 7.5% interest rate is gonna be a pretty darn high interest rate going forward. So he's like, man, maybe I should reach out to this guy, Seller John, and see if I can negotiate seller financing on this property. So buyer Bob decides to see if Seller John is interested in this seller financing concept. He offers a solution of, hey, I'll put 20% down on this property. That's $200,000. And then I'll do a 30-year mortgage amortization, but it's going to be a 10-year interest-only loan. That means I'm going to make interest-only payments for the first 10 years of this loan. So that doesn't reduce the principal balance. It still remains $800,000. But Seller John is going to collect that interest payment every single month for him, just like any other mortgage payment would be. And he's going to do it at 6.5%. So he's still getting a really good return on his money, but he doesn't have to worry about like the bank financing going forward. So the terms are a little bit better for buyer Bob than they are if he went through seller financing versus going through the bank in this instance. Okay. So buyer Bob and Seller John open up escrow to help them with this whole process. They hire an attorney to drop a promissory note for them with the agreed upon terms that we just talked about. Buyer Bob does all of his due diligence needed when he's buying the home. He does his inspections, etc., to make sure that everything's correct and like there's no big issues that he would need to pay for. Everything looks good. They close the transaction. So here's the win-win for everything in here. So buyer Bob wins because he gets a below market interest rate, and the payment and the place to call home, that's $1 million. Like, that's his whole goal, was to buy a house of $1 million and get his family a nice place to live. These are big numbers, but they're round numbers. Okay. So bear with me on these. If interest rates drop in the future and there are better terms available, he can absolutely refinance that loan and pay off that seller finance deal. So what does Seller John get? He wins because he gets the $200,000 cash that buyer Bob put down as a down payment. That's the money he receives right now when escrow is closed. So he gets some money. He may not have to pay a lot of tax on that money, depending on where you live, but that's still a pretty good deal for him, I would hope. And then he'll now receive monthly payments for the next 10 years, assuming that buyer Bob is going to keep that loan for 10 years. I don't know if he will or not. If buyer Bob decides to refinance at better terms, then he'll receive the remainder of the lump sum balance, because buyer Bob was only making interest payments on that loan. So he's got passive income coming in. If buyer Bob decides to refinance that, then he's going to get the full $800,000 back for the remainder of the sale of his home. So what a cool deal the seller financing thing is. So you see seller financing happens a lot more in markets like right now, where you have interest rates that are really, really pushing higher than they've been in the last 20 years. And that makes people think of creative ways to buy property. So when you are a buyer out there right now, don't discount seller financing. It may be something that somebody is interested in. You just have to ask. Even if it's listed with a real estate agent, if it's listed by for sale by owner, all those ways you can negotiate seller financing in some instances. And they might be able to move a property faster with better terms like that than it is if you have to go to a bank and qualify for stuff. It could close a lot faster, especially if there's not as much things that a bank has to do going forward. So think about seller financing. If you have any questions at all, if you want to run this by somebody like me, an arbitrary third party that may have no interest in your transaction, I'm happy to discuss this with you. You can click on my calendar link down below, and that'll schedule a 15-minute appointment with me, and we can chat more about this. But if you have any questions at all, make sure you reach out to me. Have a great one. Thanks a lot, guys, for watching, and I will see you on the next show. Talk to you soon.